What's up, guys? Mac D. Today we're joined by Mr. Bockler from Centennial High School. He was a computer science teacher. He was in the Navy as a lieutenant when he retired, and he was in for 8 years. So thank you for being with me. Thank you for your time. Let's dive into our warm-up questions. So what is your favorite fast food restaurant?
Well, I like lots of different fast foods and stuff. Pizza's pretty good and stuff, but I would have to say, a good burger at Fuddruckers, which may be where I go tonight with my daughter.
Okay. What's your favorite burger from there?
I like just the basic burger, because then you can fix it up any way you want and stuff, instead of them going and messing with stuff. So always, you want cheese. Well, they already got cheese there. You can put your own cheese on and stuff if you want. Yeah. So I like to make it myself.
Awesome. What's your favorite holiday?
I like Christmas a lot. Also like Halloween and stuff like that. Okay,
cool. What's your favorite place that you've traveled to in the United States?
I've traveled all over the United States. I grew up a military brat, so traveling is kind of a whole different world. Honestly, staying home sometime is the best thing to do. Yeah. Because I have traveled all around the world. I lived in Germany for the time I was 10 years old till I was 14 years old, because that was my dad's last duty station. So I've seen more of Europe than I have of the United States.
Wow.
And I was born in California. My mother is originally from Oklahoma. My dad grew up in Florida, so we got the whole southern part of the United States and would travel around there. So sometimes when they say, hey, let's take a trip, sometimes you just rather stay home.
Yeah, you're just like, that's all right. Yeah, that's crazy. So why did you join the military? Why did you make that step?
So I've got a kind of a family history. My dad's father was actually in World War I. He was too old to be in World War II. And then my mother and my dad were both in the Navy. They were both naval officers. My mother grew up in the farms in Oklahoma, and the way she basically, for lack of a better term, escaped that type of life and what it would lead to was she ended up joining the Navy. So she was one of the early women back in the, I guess probably 50s and 60s time frame, coming into the Navy, and my dad ended up joining the Navy also, came in enlisted, saw that the officer ranks was a better route to go, so he did what he needed to do and became an officer, ended up meeting my mom in the military. Yeah. So I've kind of grown up in the military. I saw the example through my family and stuff like that, so it was kind of a natural choice, because that's kind of what I knew. Yeah,
this is what you're used to.
Yep.
Whenever you went to your initial training, was it easy for you or was it hard?
It wasn't really hard, because I grew up in that lifestyle stuff. So I went through NROTC at the University of Oklahoma.
Okay.
So I had a little bit of a benefit than the average civilian, because my dad retired from the Navy. I got a presidential recommendation when I applied for NROTC.
Works pretty well.
Yeah, so that actually gave me a leg up. Everybody else has to go get some sort of recommendation from a congressman or senator or stuff like that, and that's hugely competitive. Yeah. Mine was automatic. So that helped me out. And once I got my NROTC 4-year scholarship, it's like, okay, not only am I going to have been around military bases and stuff and seen, and my, basically my dad, because my mom was relegated to being a Navy wife when my sister was born. Yep. So my experience of growing up was seeing my dad dressed up in the military uniforms, living on military bases sometimes and stuff like that. So going out there and going through the motions of playing military was not that big a step
just
for me.
Like you were actually doing it now instead of your
it's just me. Instead of seeing it around me, it's now me doing it.
Yeah, which I think is awesome and super cool.
Yep.
Out of your ROTC training and your officer training, what was your funniest memory?
So the funniest thing that I can remember was we had summer training every time. So we would go to school during the year, and then we would go basically experience the military. So this was actually part of your education. So after my freshman year in college, we did our third-class cruise, where we lived with the enlisted men, got to experience what they were doing and stuff. Well, I got an interesting adventure out of it, because I thought I was just going home to San Diego. So I went to the USS Oldendorf, Bruins-class destroyer, flew into San Diego, which is home for me. That's where my parents were still living at the time.
Gotcha.
So I'm going to training thinking, we're just going to kind of go out and come back in, be home every weekend type of thing. Yeah. And as I'm on the plane going out there, run into one of the other guys that's going to be on the ship with me, and he says, heard a rumor. I said, what'd you hear the rumor? He says, we're going to Japan. I'm like, what? I don't have any clothes. So got there, got some clothes and stuff like that, and soon after getting on the ship, we ended up heading up the West Coast to Olympia, Washington, Seattle, Washington, and eventually over to Japan. So there was a third-class midshipman, and as we were heading up the West Coast, we hit a little bit of rough water. And apparently he hadn't been around water too much and stuff like that, so it kind of got to him, and he got seasick.
Yeah.
So he was, a little embarrassed about that, because, you're doing
Right.
training, you're trying to, man up
Trying
and
to be the
everything like that.
Navy.
Yeah. So he wasn't real proud of that. So as we left the Washington area and we're heading across the Pacific Ocean to head to Japan, we hit some more rough water. Well, this time we happened to be on duty and stuff, and we were up on the bridge, and he needed to go to the bathroom, so he just kind of ducked out of the bridge, and there happens to be a bathroom head, as the Navy calls it, right there behind the bridge, and he went to go open the door, and the door was locked. So like, I'll just wait for a second and stuff. So as the door started opening, he approached the door, waiting for the person to come out. The door opened. The guy was looking pretty green and stuff like that. Before he could move, the guy threw up on him. So he was so proud the second time. He didn't get sick, but somebody got sick on him, so he got it both ways anyways.
Yeah. Gross a little bit, not gonna lie. Out of all the training, what was the hardest obstacle that you faced?
So I think the biggest challenge that I had was in flight school. At one point, we were doing, I think it was precision landings. And when you go out there, you got bookwork, which was never a problem for me and stuff. But then you got to do the hand-eye coordination. So before a flight, you would go out and talk about, okay, this is what we're going to do on this flight. We're going to practice these things. We're going to introduce this stuff, and we're going to go out there and do the things. Well, I got it down. In other words, I did not successfully complete to the instructor's satisfaction the things I was doing.
Okay.
And that's kind of a blow to your ego a little bit.
Of course.
Basically I failed.
Right. And
we get graded, it's just like in high school and stuff like that. You get grades and stuff. So I didn't pass my thing. So I had to go out there and do some things and learn this, and then be retested and stuff like that. And it was real interesting when I, basically manned up and had to tell my dad, I got it down in flight school.
Yeah.
And you're kind of embarrassed about it.
Especially with all your military family background.
Well, what I found out was my dad told me he got a down in flight school. And he says, you know what, you can be all boo-hoo and wah-wah and, poor little me about all this stuff. Or he says, really what you have to do, he says, what he did, and what I ended up doing too, was he says, you just got to shake it off, figure out how to do whatever it is you didn't do right the first time and stuff. Because it wasn't of how do you do it. I knew that stuff. It was actually the executing of it and stuff. And he says, you just got to suck it up and get on with it and stuff.
Yeah.
Because if you end up wallowing in your pity, you're going to fail and you're going to get kicked out of flight school.
Yeah.
And he said the same thing happened to him, and he succeeded, had a wonderful 25-year career in the Navy and stuff, and he says, you can do it too.
Yeah.
So at the same time of failing, I also got encouraged by my dad, which was kind of cool to realize I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
This happens to everybody.
Yeah.
And just pick it up and keep going.
That's pretty cool. What was next for you after officer training?
So after I went through, so my officer training was actually the NROTC.
Okay.
So I kind of had an interesting thing. The day that I turned 22, I also graduated from college with a computer science degree, and I got my commission as an ensign in the United States Navy.
Yeah.
So there I did all of this stuff at one time, and then off to the Navy I went.
Yeah.
So at this point, now I selected for flight school. So when you go through ROTC, you are not guaranteed training. Basically what you're guaranteed is, I'm going to exchange time for some potential skills. So you can go, when you go through ROTC, you can be a Marine. I wasn't a Marine, so I knew that wasn't my option. I got to go on submarines, surface ships, or aviation. I selected aviation, I got that. So I knew what to start. I didn't know where I would end up, but I knew that I was heading down to Pensacola, Florida, and was going to be doing the flying and stuff. Now, it wasn't until I got to Pensacola, Florida, that I went through my primary squadron. When I was down in Pensacola, I was down there with VT3 with the Red Knights, and that was going to be my primary and intermediate training. After you go for the first, I think it's 13 flights, that's when you go do the next selection. So the first selection I had was coming out of the ROTC, that was aviation. Now I start going and finding out, what am I going to be doing going forward? And there you're going to find out if you're going to go jets, so that dictates where you're going next.
Okay, so it just kind of splits.
Right, so now it's based upon your selection, you're finding out what's coming.
Gotcha.
Right? So you can go jets, you can go E2C2, you can go props, and you can go helos. So they're going to look at, just like everything else, remember you got graded, so they come out and they say, okay, these are jet grades. So they draw a line, And that line dictates, if you're above that line, jets is an option for you. You may not want it, but that's an option for you.
Oh, okay.
Well,
so there is some, you get to pick. That's great.
So they ask you, and then they look at, just like everything else, they look at the needs of the military.
Okay.
So what it turned out, because of how long it was taking me to get my flights, things got stretched out. So usually 13 flights, you would think that could be 13 days. Mine happened to be 6 months. Weather problems, planes were breaking and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that was one of the things that really was a problem for me, because I really needed to work on the hand-eye, and I may only fly once every couple weeks, just by, pure dumb luck.
Yeah.
So that meant I was not being as consistent, so my grades were suffering on the hand-eye coordination stuff a little bit. So by the time I got up to my solo, I was now 6 months into my flight training versus somebody else who could be just a few months into their flight training. And because of that, and my grade suffering, I was just below the cutoff for jets. So in other words, jets was not an option for me. Now my dad actually brought the E1 and the E2 into the Navy. And my thought at that time was, hey, I want to follow my dad's footsteps. I want to go fly the E2. You got to have jet grades because you got to go through the jet pipeline to do that. So that was off the table too. And then, so that basically left me helos or props. And I ended up choosing props. And my dad had told me, he says, one day you might get married, and your home life, the little bit that you have, even though you have separation in the military, is going to be better if you do props and stuff, because we don't fly on aircraft carriers. We're home-based. So even though we go on deployments, we would typically be home longer. So that's what I ended up doing, and ended up selecting that, and found out later on that I was going to fly the P-3 Orion.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I got to that training, which then meant, okay, now you're going to stay in Pensacola, do your intermediate training. Then I went from there to Corpus Christi, Texas. In Corpus Christi, Texas, I was with VT-28 with the Rangers, and there I went from flying the T-34 Charlie, which is a turboprop, to flying the T-44, and so I went from 1 engines to 2 engines. So now I know I'm going to P3s, but I don't know what squadron I'm going to P3s yet. So when I'm in Corpus Christi, I get my wings. In other words, you qualify, you're now an official U.S. Naval Aviator. Cool. So now I've passed that, I got my wings. I also end up getting my orders. So now I find out what's coming next.
Yes.
So I had orders to go to VP-22 in Barbers Point, Hawaii. With a stop, I've got to go to Moffett Field in the San Francisco area, so I'm going to go through VP-31, and that's where I'm going to actually learn to fly the P-3 Orion. So you started with the T-34 1 engine, T-44 2 engines, P-3 4 engines. This is the same thing as the Lockheed Electric, which is an airliner. Okay, to kind of give you an idea.
Okay.
This is like the size of a 737.
Wow.
Okay, so now everything that I was doing with 1, now there's 4 of everything. So you have to go learn all that stuff. So I make that stop there in Moffett Field, learn to fly the P-3 with my orders to ultimately go to Hawaii. I also, because of that training, you have to go through some water training. We had nuke weapons that we could carry. So with nuclear weapons, you have to go to nuclear weapons school and stuff. So I had to go do all that stuff before I ended up going to Barbers Point, Hawaii, to go fly with VP-22 the Blue Keys. Ended up being there for about 3 years. And then after that, I ended up selecting for my shore tour. Things were getting a little bit tight. So the only way that I could fly was I had to go to do what's called flying recruiting. So in other words, I was a recruiter for the Navy. I ended up getting orders to the recruiting district in Michigan, and they had a T-34 Bravo. So this is actually older than the T-34 Charlie. This is the only plane I flew that was older than me. So these were the planes that they'd kept a few of them around when the T-34 Charlies came out. So we went back to Pensacola, kind of got checked out on those planes and stuff, and we had one up at the civilian airport in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So in theory, we could go out and take people flying and stuff like that if they were going to go into the training command or something like that, and they were wanting to be a pilot and stuff. Reality was it was really for us to keep our hours up and stuff. Unfortunately, they decided to go save some money because money was getting tight, so they got rid of the planes. So we ended up actually flying some of the last ones away to flying clubs and to museums. And then I ended up leaving the military after that. So that came up to about 8 years.
Wow. Yeah, awesome. That was so much information. You're such a good interviewer. You're answering all my questions for me without asking, which is great. A couple of questions just to rewind a little bit. How did you stay motivated during those 6 months of just, I'm not flying, I've been waiting a couple weeks since my last flight,
I think like everything else in life, the trick is you got to know what's there, not what's right here. If you focus on the here and now, life sucks sometimes, right? So you have to know why you're doing what you're doing and keep focused on that. High school student, are you loving your high school education and stuff when you're in class? You got to take a test? No, that sucks, right?
Yeah.
But you have to know that this is just one step, because the next step is going to be graduation from high school. So you got to keep I call it the carrot, the cookie, whatever it is you're going for, you got to keep the long term. One of the things that I absolutely hate is I hate running. And I was a swimmer in high school. And I thought, I go to do ROTC and stuff, and they go, you got to run. In the Navy, we had to do physical fitness tests and stuff, and they said you had to run 1.5 miles. In ROTC, with the Marines, they go, no, you got to run 3 miles.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I hate running. I can't run 3 miles. And that's kind of the way I looked at it. So if I focused on run 3 miles, no, I can't run 3 miles. I hate running. Well, it just so happened they had a U course. So the only way that I could run 3 miles was I didn't run 3 miles. I run to the first point. Then I make the turn. Then I run to the second point. Then I make the turn. Run to the third point. Now I'm halfway. Now I just basically repeat it. By the time I'm done, I ran 3 miles. But if I mentally have to run 3 miles, I hate running.
Yeah.
I don't want to run. I'm thinking, I was a swimmer. If I'm on a ship and the ship sinks, I'm not going to run to shore. I'm going to swim to shore. So sometimes you got to look at those things and find a way around them. Otherwise, you're not going to get to the end result.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. Okay, so military life in general, what was one of the favorite places that I got to travel to?
I got to travel all around the Pacific Rim. One of the things I think that I got to experience with, for me, was kind of cool, and I need to get back there, was my first class cruise. I was on the USS Enterprise. So we had done our third class cruise, and we were cruising to go live with the enlisted, see the enlisted side of the house. First class cruise, same type of thing, but now you're living with the officers. Okay. So I ended up, surprisingly, traveling around the whole world. I took off out of San Diego, heading east. I ended up flying to the Mediterranean and getting on the Enterprise, and we were kind of motoring around the Med because they had come up because there was a world situation going on. And then it was resolved, everything was, kind of quieting down and stuff, and the ship was supposed to be actually heading home. But now the midship were on there. So they were trying to get permission to go through the Suez Canal, because they actually came up through the Suez Canal, which is completely unheard of. Now, I had seen some pictures and stuff. Suez Canal is a huge, basically, canal cut through the desert.
Yeah.
And the idea is, and the reason they don't usually let this happen is, if an aircraft carrier comes through there, they fill up the Suez Canal. So if a terrorist was to then attack it, sink it in the Suez Canal, you don't have a canal anymore. You basically have a dam.
Yeah.
So they don't usually like that. So they were in the Mediterranean trying to get permission to go down the Suez Canal, because it's a little bit of a shortcut when you're heading back to the west coast of the United States. So they never got permission. So we ended up heading out the Straits of Gibraltar, went down around Africa, and ended up going to Perth, Australia. And what was really cool about it was, this was the first time in like 5 years there had been a major military U.S. presence coming. So this was this whole diplomatic thing that we're going down there to make a visit, and they had parties, and we had to have dress uniforms and stuff like that. We played rugby against their national team. Now this is the equivalent of, you're coming to town and you're going to go play the Cowboys type of thing. So this was their award-winning rugby team, and the funny thing was, we're cruising along and stuff, and there just happened to be one of the officers who was in one of the squadrons who happened to play rugby in college. And he's like, okay, this is going to happen, and we need people. Anybody know how to play rugby? Come on out here and stuff. So we're literally out on the non-skid on the aircraft carrier flight deck, and they're trying to teach us how to play rugby. And then, of course, we were young, athletic, in shape, college kids and stuff like that, so they were willing to, take anybody they could and stuff. So we ended up going out there, and one of the things, like I said, that we did was, we ended up playing rugby against them and stuff.
Wow.
Ended up getting to spend some time there. We were there for about 3 days or so, visiting the countryside, checking some stuff out, so that was pretty neat to be able to go on to. At that point, we came to the end of our 30 days where we were supposed to be getting off the ship. So about half of the people that were on the ship with us, they ended up flying to the Philippines, getting ready to head home. We got permission to extend for another couple of weeks, so we got to take the transit up to the Philippines. So we were actually on, instead of for 4 weeks, we were on cruise for 6 weeks, and ended up making a stop in the Philippines just long enough to have a party, go out on town once, and then we were shipped off to Manila so that the ship could head on home. And then we flew home across the Atlantic. So I started in San Diego, started heading east, made it to the east coast of the United States, jumped across the Atlantic Ocean, all the way around, came across the Pacific Ocean, flew across the Pacific Ocean back to LA and then down to San Diego. So that summer, not only did I get to go to Australia, but I got to go travel the whole world.
Yeah, that's pretty good. That's a pretty good deal.
Yep.
So let's see. You talked about a whole bunch of places that you went. You were in the Philippines, right?
Yep.
Did you get a chance to interact with the natives and culture there? You said you had
Oh, yeah.
out on the town.
Yep. I actually got to go there several times because when we were stationed in Hawaii, one of the things I did was I went on deployment to Misawa, Japan. We were up there for 5 months.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a point where there was some bad weather coming in and stuff, and we were doing some debts and some different things. So I ended up going back down to the Philippines, being there for a couple of weeks and stuff like that. So you could go off the base, they had, normal type of bars and,
Mm-hmm.
restaurants and things like that. Little different world and stuff like that. Probably not appropriate for some of the content here, but it gets you to seeing the third world and how different people live and think and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
I know what you're talking about. Did you have any weird, bizarre foods while you were there? I'm sure you did, if
Oh.
you were willing to try them.
One of the weirdest things that I think I ever saw was in the Orient, they have grubs. Do you know what a grub is?
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
Well, they eat them.
Yeah.
So
It's food.
the two things that I think were the weirdest things, and I thought about it, and then I thought, no, I don't think so. One was grubs, and there was literally somebody there on the street corner that had some dirt and stuff, and they had grubs in there, and you could pay, and they would pick a grub out, and you could eat it live.
Yeah.
It wasn't even dead. It was like, yeah, no thanks.
Yeah, that's
I passed on that
solid
one.
no.
When I was in Korea, one of the big things there was kimchi.
Okay.
Kimchi is basically rotten cabbage.
Okay.
They go bury it in the ground and it ferments possibly for a year,
Wow.
and then they eat it. So it's got a very pungent
Yeah.
odor, among other things. I didn't really go for that. The one thing that I was willing to try, and I think this was the first time I went to Japan, I'm not a fish eater. So when people go out and eat sushi and stuff like that, that's just like, yeah, no.
You just passed, yeah.
So I went to a sushi bar when I was in Japan. Hey, if you're going to go to Japan and you're going to try sushi, that's the
probably
place to
some
go
good
check it
sushi,
out and
yeah.
doing stuff. So it was very, very beautiful to look at. Still not a fish fan, but I tried it there. I did try that one.
Yeah, okay, cool. So my next question is my favorite question is, was there an act of courage in someone else that you want to share? Could have been something that you saw firsthand or something that you just heard about.
I think anybody who's willing to step up and serve their country
Yeah.
is willing to potentially put their life on the line. Every single one of them is a hero, but pretty much none of us will admit that we are.
Right.
We're just doing our duty and doing our jobs. Every day, every place, you have firemen, firefighters, policemen, people in the military, every one of them is a hero.
Yeah.
They're just going out there and willing to put their life on the line.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. When you got out, how was adjusting to civilian life?
Mine not so difficult. Mainly, I was in during the Gulf War, but yet I didn't have to see any action during the Gulf War. We were changing from one version of the P-3 to another and stuff. So kind of a funny story. We were actually down in Panama doing drug interdiction flights. We flew steady for 2 weeks. We would be, basically there was 2 crews. We would fly from lights up to lights down. So basically when the sun was rising, we were off the deck. When the sun was setting, after it set, we were back on the deck. We would then debrief and get something to eat, go to bed, and at 4 o'clock in the morning the next crew went. 4 o'clock the next morning we went. We did that for 2 weeks.
So you staggered the days?
Yes, so we were just flip-flopping there, and there was a plane in the air every single day during all night. We were basically looking for drug runners and stuff like that. Did that straight for 2 weeks, flew our butts off. The night we were flying, or basically the day we were flying back, we were in the air flying back to cross into the continental United States.
Mm-hmm.
And the radio operator was on with the high-frequency radios and stuff like that, and he was blaring across the speakers and stuff. That was the launch of the Gulf War, the original Gulf War. So there's a whole thing about in Hawaii, you have to remain one night in the continental United States because of the distance, and if you were off 1 degree and the thousands of miles that you're going to cover, you could potentially end up totally missing Hawaii.
Yeah.
And if you had problems and stuff, so you're always required to spend one night. So we ended up going back to Moffett Field. So we were in the officers club, and while we were there in the officers club to spend the night and stuff like that, watching TV, we were watching the exact same thing that you as an individual were watching on TV and the news and everything else as they were launching missiles and everything else. So that's how I found out about the Gulf War the same time everybody else found out about the Gulf War watching.
Yeah.
So that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, if you could go back over and do it all again, would you?
Yes, I think service to your country, honestly, I believe everybody ought to have to serve the country because it gives you a completely different perspective. It's not just about me. We live in this wonderful country. Everybody ought to be willing to step up and serve. And, you know, hopefully you don't have to die for your country, but are you willing to?
Yeah.
Because this country is giving you and providing a lot for you. Are you willing to pay them back for what they provide for you?
Right, yeah. What 3 words would you use to describe military life?
I would say unselfish service to others.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for your time. Thank you for your service. God bless you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yep.